September 16, 2017. Taffy is a Welshman. Taffy is not a magician, though Merlin was from Wales, and friend Danny is a statistician. Taffy wants to be like old Virgil, who created his own fountain of youth. So Taffy has decided to travel back through the years before time makes ancient good uncouth. September 16, 2016. Taffy is a Welshman. Taffy is not a Liverpudlian. Taffy is an Anglo-Sonian who's read about the people Lilliputian. But on his 64th birthday, with the hope of many a more, Taffy's going to sing the Beatles song to his quig, "Will you still need me when I'm 64? September 16, 2015. Taffy is a Welshman. Taffy's going to tell the whole story. On his 63rd birthday, friends Jean and David gave him a book by Edward Gorey. And there are other things to tell, for that's not all. Friends Maureen and Bob were there and gave him a Friedrich Nietzsche doll. March 1st, 2015. Taffy always wants to remember his party at Pearl Street Books, with wine and felonfoil ale, catered by his favorite cooks. All his friends were there, his 365 new verses to hear and see, and Cavan and Christian made Welsh Rabbit to celebrate through the year with Taffy, Trogway, and me. September 16, 2014. When Taffy turned 62, he showed his good breeding. He gathered together his friends to do a special play reading. It had a part for Laura Lausier. It had one just right for his spouse. It was his own creation. It was the day Eisenhower bicycled to the White House. September 16, 2013. The day he became 61, well, really the day before, was Taffy's senior citizen recital when he sang songs out of his lore, from Shakespeare to Mother Goose. He knew it wouldn't flop. There was La Fontaine and Offenbach, and Dinner for 55 from Jim Henson's Westby Quick Stop. September 16, 2012. Taffy hit the big 6-0, but he had a truly great idea. He asked all his guests to bring and sing a song, and guess what? No one found it queer. Buddy Rundhagen sang in Norwegian. It was a mini Purim of sweetness and light. Maureen Allen sent in I'm from New Jersey, and Elsie Anachuk, We All Love Saturday Night. March 16, 2012. Turning 59 is nothing. It's not a milestone, but reaching 59 and a half puts you in another zone. It's really more an era than a zone, sort of like paleontology. For when Taffy shuffled to that coil, he could withdraw from his IRAs without penalty. September 16, 2011. On Friday the 16th of September, Taffy and Quaig went to Shakespeare's Tempest. It was an Elizabethan experience, not at all like going to the dentist. They went with Paul and Barbara. There was Ariel and Caliban the Tough. There was a brave kingdom with music for nothing, and Prospero, whose library was dukedom enough. September 16, 2010. At the hospital where he worked, on your birthday you brought the treat. With fellow chaplains and friends, this was biblically right and meet. There was Mike, there was Sandy, Father Todd and Leroy from King's, Mickey, Beth, Paul, and Catherine, whose card read, You're not old until the fat lady sings. September 16, 2009. To commemorate turning 57, Taffy composed some near-death hymns. It was philosophically serious history, not a collection of mere whims. The bottle of nose drops at Williamstown, the house fire at Chevy Chase, the rusty nail on Ilaho, Maine, and the Minnesota deer not far from the Crosse and home base. September 16, 2008. Taffy was a happy jock. celebrating his 56 years and their pleasures. He certainly wasn't a melancholy jock who said, "I am for other than for dancing measures." With the help of Paul, Carol, and Terry, in cahoots with Simcha the rabbi, Taffy sang and danced to 4 Offenbach songs, for Nicky, his dance coach, had given him an alibi. September 16, 2007. When planning his first senior citizen recital, Taffy was nervous from the start. He had his Offenbach songs down pat, but could he look smart? His friends, though, were there to help him, with each scene begun by the rabbi in full view, and Pam Kelly settled it all by saying, "Taffy, it's your birthday. Everyone will be nice to you." September 16, 2006. On his 54th birthday, Taffy was in rehearsal for a Cole Porter musical whose themes are universal. He was Reverend Henry T. Dobson, who's hustled off stage before scene 2. But as it was anything goes, he returned to hear Moonface Martins be like the bluebird who's never blue, for he knows from his upbringing what singing can do. September 16, 2005. Taffy's 53rd birthday was the first at his new church, a friendly Norwegian Lutheran one, found at the end of a short search. They had some really nice traditions down lower Coon Valley's way. So at coffee hour, everyone sang to him, "I dag det Taffys fødselsdag, hooray, hooray, hooray." September 16, 2004. On Thursday, September 16, Taffy was 52 from 52, and on the very next day, this is what he had to do: to travel to Aunt Harriet's funeral at Trinity Church, Portland, Maine. She was his Mam's closest sister, and now Mam's life would no longer be the same. September 16, 2003. Taffy was 51, and what the heck was he doing? He was having a mid-career crisis, as from his church there had been some shooing, but the Lichters helped with a house, as he did a year of clinical pastoral education, and evenings upstairs in his small study, Taffy labored to prepare his journals for publication. September 16, 2002. Taffy had big plans for when he turned 50, a semi-centennial year that, in American slang, is pretty nifty, a truly special occasion like finding an original Offenbach libretto, so Taffy wanted to celebrate it by going back to the Castagneto. September 16, 2001. Taffy was almost 49 when along came 9/11, an act which changed the world and sent some 3,000 souls to heaven. Taffy's birthday fell on the next Sunday, and he chose Psalm 14:4 as the link, for many church members were very upset, saying, "Taffy, we need to know what we are to think." September 16, 2000. In his younger days, Taffy wondered about 2000 AD. It was a long way off. What would it be like to see? And then zip, it was there, and really everything was okay. But in the meantime they'd changed its name, and now it was called Year 2K. September 16, 1999. When Taffy and Famille got back from France, they had to adjust in many a way, though friends like the Whiteways, Père et Fils, welcomed them, making them feel loved and wanted to stay. But some parishioners were unhappy, and it wasn't easy, God only knows. For the proverb about life also holds for the church, plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose. Le 16 septembre 1998. Pendant bien une année, Taffy était un Gallois. Il vivait dans le centre de la France, en famille, tous les trois. Sa fille fréquentait l'école maternelle, sa femme jouait l'orgue, mais pas tant. Et Taffy chantait avec joie d'après Peggy, Je suis un pasteur protestant. September 16, 1997. Taffy's best birthday present for his 45 years came from his daughter and almost brought him to tears. For 2 days she was Taffy's student, or rather he was her training wheels, and then she went solo on her new bike amid joy and laughter and squeals. September 16, 1996. Taffy's church stood on a corner of a very busy street, and there were plans to make it busier, to widen it by several more feet. They called it the North-South Corridor. It was something Taffy never wanted to see. So on the day after his 44th birthday, Taffy made his first appearance on TV. September 16, 1995. 3 days before his 43rd was a more important day. It was sort of like a birth in a legal kind of way. Taffy and family traveled to Milwaukee, to its Office of Immigration, and there they signed the papers for their daughter's naturalization. September 16, 1994. Taffy had been a parent for some 8 months of the year. He proudly did his half of things, bottles, diapers, etc., all with good cheer, and then to refute the Latin proverb, either children or books, no other option, he started to write a Kierkegaard-like title, The Concept of Adoption. September 16, 1993. On the day of his birthday, Taffy's Quig gave him a new pen. She also gave him a bicycle card, and that's the place to begin. She wished him a happy birthday, using their private mutual name. She called him the best bread maker and wrote, I'll love you forever the same. September 16, 1992, a traditional Middle Western birthday. Lordy, lordy, look who's 40. At Taffy's church they were praying. It was a time of celebration, a time for many a saying. His favorite came from the Sheikies, whose kind good humor was always near. Their birthday card read, 40's not the end of the world, but you can see it from there. September 16, 1991. 39 was for Taffy the ultimate magic number. It wasn't merely bridge for 3, it was wholly like he who doesn't slumber. Taffy thought about his father when he turned 39 and some, for his Tad became Fred 39 when he was only 21. September 16, 1990. On this day in time, Taffy turned 38. He was young and happy. He thought everything was great. But then he read where Luther, in Table Talk, a Boswellian book, said, one's 38th year is evil and dangerous. By reason of the conjunction of Saturn and Mars, let's go take a look. September 16, 1989. A lot happened that September when Taffy turned 37. He was installed at St. John's Church by Reverend Moyer and a committee of 11. The sermon was about the high calling of ministry and keeping on track. Reverend Moyer compared it to the circus rider who soon learns that the safest thing is to stay on the tiger's back. September 16, 1988. 'Twas Taffy's last birthday in Italy, where he had already celebrated 5. He was nursing a broken elbow caused by his taking a dive from a borrowed bicycle on July 31st, none other. This was in Cambridge, England, on the 38th birthday of his brother. September 16, 1987. Taffy was almost at the Castagneto on this mercredi. For over the next weekend he was there and got to see his wonderful friends Albert and Gisela, who hosted his church on retreat, and there in historic Torre Pellice, old and new Waldensians everyone got to greet. July 15, 1987. The Taffys had been in Italy for almost 2 whole years, and then there came a day when he got some unexpected cheers. It happened in midweek, when everyone is usually on the go. Taffy walked into their apartment, and 15 friends shouted, "Buon onomastico!" Il 16 settembre 1986. Ecco Taffy, un gallese, in Italia dopo un anno. Lui cominciava di parlare, come si dice a Torino, pian piano. E cosa festeggiavano i Taffy questo 16 di settembre? La loro nuova gatta Harriet, di buon carattere e di colore ambre. September 16, 1985. The Taffys will never forget their first days in Turin. They arrived from Paris by train, ready their 3 years to begin. The Tachas met them at the station, and they were greeted from noon to dark, and 2 days later Taffy preached his first sermon, La Vita Nuova, in Dante and in Mark. September 16, 1984. In 84, Taffy was a senior, though he was only 32. He was in his last year of seminary, his first with his Quake, beautiful and smart too. They spent the month of August in Europe with a week in Old Cymru. And Taffy never quoted the bards. When I said I would die a bachelor, I didn't think I would live till I was married. September 16, 1983. The day wasn't so important, though at dusk began Yom Kippur. It was what happened before and after. Of that Taffy was very sure. The before, he composed his first song. The after, he proposed to his girl down on his knee. The former was on a bike in Paris, the latter in her apartment in Washington, D.C. September 16, 1982. Taffy turned 30, but he hadn't finished his education. He had, in fact, embraced a new alma mater, the root word of matriculation. He began his first year of seminary in a matrix of fear and awe, and just a few weeks later he attended the piano recital of his future mother-in-law. September 16, 1981. Usually on your birthday, you know exactly where you are. But on his 29th, Taffy and Bro were traveling in a car somewhere east of Foxborough, where they had done their filial duty, building a paternal memorial desk. It had cement, it had rebar, it had beauty. September 16, 1980. Every Tuesday night, Taffy's Tad wrote a letter. He started in November 77, when his health was a little better. Taffy's brother was in Africa, serving a tour in the Peace Corps, and Tad wrote him faithfully, and Bro Freddy saved the whole store. September 16, 1979. Taffy was now back home after a 2-month trip out west, where he did more Walter Lowry research, and for his Tad's mam what he did best. He kept house for her at her cabin, where he lived like a Moravian single brother, and then back in Princeton he tried substituting again until a student said, "You can't tell me what to do, you ain't my mother." September 16, 1978. In September 78, Taffy reached the height of his glory as a cyclist, and here's the Alpine story. After 3 weeks with his frere, Taffy had to cycle alone, alas, but he made up for it by crossing the Alps at the Col de Montgenèvre Pass. Den 4. juli 1978. Ver eneste år I juli, I julens rebild bakker, danskerne har en stor fest, for mange amerikanske aftersnakker, og det år var Taffy til, ja, netop fordi han havde nul, for at cykle derop fra Esbjerg, og at sige til alle sin fint fløde med rødgrød. September 16, 1977. Taffy was long back from his wanderjahr and was home seeking a repetition, a rehearsal of his college days when everything was in pristine condition. He was back in the PUP warehouse. He was back taking a chance, trying to wow rich, beautiful co-eds by quoting St. Bernard's, "The repetition designates the double beauty of the substance." September 16, 1976. Of all the events of 76, Taffy's annus mirabilis, the most influential of them all, was the Castagneto and its bliss. The happiness began with lunch under a spreading chestnut tree. All Taffy said was, "I'm researching Walter Lowry," and Albert Lazier replied, "That's enough for me." June 26, 1976. Taffy can remember the day when he got his first lunette. It was a Saturday in Tours, where his French sisters shielded him from grisette. He was with Christine et Marie-Claude for the morning appointment, which was kind, and then Marie helped pick out the frames for his no longer perfect body, which she had touched with her mind. September 16, 1975. If you're living at home, a college senior at age 23, you celebrate your birthday twice with friends et en famille. With the family, a reunion dinner, sans Freddy, who was in Hawaii on the loose, avec amis, a Shakespeare play reading, between courses of an excellent Moroccan's couscous. September 16, 1974. Taffy, at 22, has two stories to tell. One is from his novel, the other is virtual. In his novel, he's in Canada, à Trois-Rivières, Maurice. In reality, he was in Princeton, with new friends et autres délices. September 16, 1973. There's a word Taffy learned from his dad. It means the lowest of the low. It means you've been down so long, there's nowhere but up to go. At his 21st birthday, which should have been one of great cheer, Taffy reached his majority and sunk to his nadir. September 16, 1972. Taffy was a welcher as he turned 20, though when you're at that age, you should have it good and plenty. But Taffy was double-minded, in doubt about things on earth and things above. He thought he was like the boy in the Fantastics, when what he really heard was, "I have this against you, that you've left your first love." September 16, 1971. 3 days after his birthday, his McGill friend Will got married. Taffy was at the wedding, and 3 days in Matamoras, PA, tarried. Meanwhile, back at the ranch of his novel, in Volume 2, with pages uncurled, Taffy and friends were in Trois-Rivières, starting to rehearse Orpheus in the Underworld. September 16, 1970. Taffy wasn't a draft dodger, but there he was in Montreal. He was a freshman at McGill, all prepared to have a ball. During the first week of orientation, Taffy sang "I'm a Believer," and on his birthday he went to a game, and he saw the Expos beat Tom Seaver. September 16, 1969. Taffy was much too young in this most amazing year to know what conscience is, for he had read but little Shakespeare. But since meeting her in summer school, where he learned to correctly pronounce Le Mans, he was content her poor drudge to be, and to recite, "On n'est pas sérieux quand on a 17 ans." September 16, 1968. It wasn't Expo 67, it was Expo 68. Taffy and Ken bicycled to Canada, and everyone thought it was great. They made it to Montreal. They made it to Quebec, la cité douce. But Taffy fell in distant Nova Scotia and landed in the hospital of Tatamagouche. September 16, 1967. Every family has its traditions, and Taffy's had a birthday one. On the evening of your day, whether you were a daughter or a son, you got to choose the menu. It was your unalienable right. So for his 15th birthday, Taffy sang to his mam, "Don't cook tonight, call Chicken Delight." September 16, 1966. When you start high school, things begin to change. Taffy stopped his paper route and began in cross-country to range. His Tad came to his second meet, along with Joel Goldberger and his specs. The varsity shut out Pennington, and Joel captured Taffy's finish with his double lens reflex. September 16, 1965. Taffy's ambition started early, the ambition to speak French. His 7th and 8th grade teacher was Mr. Hunt, a real Haitian mensch. But it wasn't his fault when Taffy, in excitement for Paris and its world, went on the class trip to La Boheme and didn't understand a single word. March 16, 1965. Taffy was both too old and too young to celebrate his birthday by half. If he had tried to do so, he probably only would have gotten a laugh. At 12 and 6 months, he was a serious, a little Horatio Alger he, going to work with a special newsboy permit, his proof of age, his BC. September 16, 1964. The biggest thing about 64 was the move to Princeton from Chevy Chase. Taffy's Tad started in February, but for school, etc., the family stayed in place. When the movers finally came on June 24th, they took everything but the kitchen fridge, and Taffy resolved that in his new town he'd no longer use his childhood nickname Midge. September 16, 1963. Taffy didn't know it, but he was a future English major. It all started in 6th grade with Mrs. Wanless and her special favor. She was great at reading out loud after lunch in a recess of hard play. She read us the Newbery winners and more, covering a chapter a day. June 1st, 1963. It's a date he can remember, again thanks to his Tad, who saved memorabilia even when it was just a tab. So Taffy knows when he started his route. His Tad saved his very first bill. That June he delivered 2,227 papers, and at 11 the $40 he made was a big thrill. September 16, 1962. Can Taffy do her justice? His teacher of his 5th grade. Her name was Mrs. Onachuk. She looked like Judy in the Easter parade. She taught every subject, from reading to arithmetic, and every day she'd be at her piano, sharing her specialty, world folk music. September 16, 1961. Taffy's 9th was his first birthday without his Tad, who was in darkest Africa, teaching 2 countries down from Chad. He was 7 months out of the White House, full of ideas, cruising with full sails. And if God's providence had been a little different, the whole family could have spent the year in Wales. May 1st, 1961. Some memories are indelible, like La Gloire de son Père. All Taffy has to do is shut his eyes, and in a moment he is there, in the lobby of the Shoreham, after going to a game only to have it rained out surely. Tad took them to meet the Yanks, and Taffy was treated to a late lunch by star pitcher Bob Turley. September 16, 1960. On that Friday night, Taffy knows exactly where he was. He even knows right where he was sitting, and again he knows this because his Tad saved mementos of his childhood early and late. Taffy was at Griffith Stadium in box 31, row 3, seat 8. September 16, 1959. The biggest thing about 59 was the family trip out west. The destination was Foxborough, or the ranch as it was known best. Taffy remembers the blue Ford station wagon and how the days could be long. But thanks to his sister's journal, we now know his very first song. September 16, 1958. Taffy began first grade, which is a pretty big thing. The principal was Mr. Powers, his teacher, Miss Alice Ring. Rosemary was the school. Broad Freddy was his reliance. But the most memorable thing about the year became Freddy's annual claim, "I never got my 1958 allowance." September 16, 1957. Kindergarten was in the morning, so Taffy knows where he was after noon. His Tad took him and 5 friends to see a submarine and its platoon. It was the USS Drum, docked in the D.C. Navy Yard. They got to climb in and all over it, and when they left, they got an honorary submariner card. September 16, 1956. Is that the White House? Taffy asked all the way down as they drove to D.C. from Massachusetts, stopping first at Old Princetown. Joe, Liz, and Freddie often said yes, ignoring the golden rule. But that fall, Taffy ruled the roost, for all his siblings had to go right to school. September 16, 1955. Taffy turned 3. He was no longer a terrible 2. But over the long hot summer, Taffy had tried something new. His sibs never let him forget it, and it caused his Tad a bit of a shock. The day Taffy took all his clothes off, put them in his wagon, and walked around the block. September 16, 1954. Taffy sits and writes these verses at his productive oval table in his nice basement study, where he can look up and be able to see his favorite photo with his Tad on a summer day just before he's 2. Tad's holding him tight and watching him as they perch on a board set up for painters and their crew. September 16, 1953. You can't call it a pilgrimage when you're not even 1 year old. But Taffy did some traveling after Tad left Wauseon and his fold. Tad started his new church in May, but the parsonage was far from ready. So everyone but Tad went first to Hartsdale and then to Ashland, where Taffy stayed with Mam and Freddie. September 16, 1952. Now we are surrounded, wrote Tad to the greatest to the least, by the 4 points of the compass, starting with Joe on the east, and then there's Elizabeth on the south, and Frederick on the west, and now on the north by Donald. May all of them be blessed. September 9 to 15, 1952. Taffy was full term, ready to greet the world, but Mam's water hadn't broken, and was it a boy or a girl? Tad was ready with some names. In 2 columns was his list, and if it had been a girl, Hannah Sheldon was the first wish. September 2 to 8, 1952. Taffy was in his 37th week, and Tad had a slew of names. Most of them were family, and none of them plain Janes. There was Jonathan, George, and Daniel, Barbara, Valonia, and Louise. There was Harriet and Rebecca, Martha, Mary, but not Lazarus, if you please. August 26 to September 1st, 1952. The list of names was just starting, and no one was taking sides, but Tad listed all his siblings and some great-uncles besides: Kelvin, Winfred, Morley, and Quentin, Brainerd, Cephas, and Louis Volti. but not Maswell Ewing Sr., Tad's granddad who sported a goatee. August 19 to 25, 1952. There was one name on the list which could be difficult to explain without knowing the family lore and the lure of a major league game. For right there in column 2, Tad wrote the word baseball. For on Saturday, August 23, where was Ma'am? Watching the Cleveland Indians at Yankee Stadium's hall. August 12 to 18, 1952. Ma'am and the kids stayed in Hartsdale while Tad made the trip alone, the 150-mile drive to Williamstown, wondering if it would become their new home. August 14 was the first interview with members of the First Congregational Church. Tad was eager but felt guilty about leaving Wauseon in the lurch. August 5 to 11, 1952. Taffy now weighed some 4 pounds, midway in his last trimester. It was a time of vacation, just 4 weeks, not a semester. They were visiting Tad's parents at their house since 1935, which they shared with the 2 uncles who during the Depression had kept Foxborough alive. July 29 to August 4, 1952. Taffy was at the birthday party, though he was not, of course, yet born. On Thursday, Broad Freddy turned 2, and decorator Tad did the house adorn. He started with a passel of balloons, saying, "A big quantity is always right and meet." And so on July 31st, Wauseon's birthday headquarters was 237 Marshall Street. July 22 to 28, 1952. You can't really see Taffy in the photo in the Toledo Blade, but he was there in Ma'am with Tad on their bikes in a Wauseon glade. Reporter Lee Hafkin wrote the story about Tad, a clergy of a different kind. The headline's long but worth quoting. Wauseon minister startles and entertains but is never boring, listeners find. July 15 to 21, 1952. The Olympics there in Helsinki were in their very first week. Taffy there in utero was marathoning better than a Greek. He was well past 26. He had indeed reached his 15th fortnight. He was truly holding the course, and he would soon arrive forthright. July 8 to 14, 1952. Taffy, a week into his 3rd trimester, continued his hidden growth. And what a week it was for family and nation both. July 10, Ma'am and Tad's anniversary. July 11, Liz's 5th, and hence no longer a tyke. And that was also the day in Chicago when the victorious slogan began, "I like Ike." July 1st to 7, 1952. Taffy was in his 28th week, the nation in its 176th year. The war had been over for 7, and the cry of the baby the whole land did hear. Taffy would be one of that year's 3.9 million, and yes, he was part of the baby boom. And on his first glorious 4th, he could see light filtering in through Ma'am's womb. June 24 to 30, 1952. Taffy could hiccup, or was it hiccough? He could open and close his eyes, and if that wasn't enough, he could suck his fingers, which each had a tiny little nail, but he never sucked his toes, and he was no longer skinny as a rail. June 17 to 23, 1952. Tad stayed in Wauseon when Ma'am and their 3 took a plane, flying down to the family reunion in Ashland, long connected with the Putnam name, and there where coal meets iron, Taffy met his aunts and uncles and all. You can see him in the group photo, for Ma'am's belly was now the size of a small soccer ball. June 10 to 16, 1952. Taffy's grandmam was still there, in the afterglow of the doctoral degree. Vacation Bible School had started Monday, and that evening was Rotary. Tad was the featured speaker, as he was next night at Circus Boy Scout, where he was called Master of Ceremonies, and Grandmam loved it when he used a loudspeaker and didn't shout. June 3 to 9, 1952. At Princeton he was pre-med, though Tad never became an MD. But Sunday, June 8, was special, as on that day he became a DD. It was at Defiance College, at their 50th graduation. President McCann hooded him, and Tad gave the benediction. May 27 to June 2, 1952. It could have been deadly if they had been German. All three kids had the measles, so that Sunday they missed the sermon. Ma'am, of course, was with them, for sometimes it's a virtue to stay home. And old pre-med Tad said a prayer of thanks for deliverance from congenital rubella syndrome. May 20 to 26, 1952. When Taffy first started to speak, he'd call his sisters the same. They both were Joe Holly, and Tad was greatly amused by the name. But Taffy had nothing to say when Sister Joe turned 6. But on Sunday, May 25th, Ma'am started to feel Taffy's first kicks. May 13 to 19, 1952. How does it feel on your birthday when you know you're going to give birth? When you've passed the halfway mark and you can see it in your girth? When on the 16th of May you turn 32? Do you keep on singing, "All I see are skies of blue"? May 6 to 12, 1952. Taffy lived in water called amniotic fluid. Taffy would later learn some Greek, the language of medical druids. He was sort of like a fish, but the nursery rhyme had it right. His sea world of the amnion was a little lamb in Dr. Harvey's sight. April 29 to May 5th, 1952. Taffy didn't know what it was, and he still doesn't know what it is, but he now started producing meconium, another Greek word created in the doctor biz. "Oh shit," says Taffy, looking up meconium in Wikipedia, "so that's what it is." Taffy, like almost other fetuses, would become constipated for some 19 weeks. But what did developing babies do when they had to take their leaks? April 22 to 28, 1952. Taffy would be a boomer, and the Mozart effect was a distant thesis. There wasn't any ultrasound or amniocentesis, but Taffy could now hear Ma'am sing when she was as happy as could be. Her favorite song from the hit movie, "Blue skies, nothing but blue skies do I see." April 15 to 21, 1952. At least it wasn't the Aleutians, where he was for the duration of the Second World War, a very cold place to serve the nation. When he was called up for Korea, Fort Lewis, Washington was where he got to be. This was Tad's closest brother, whom Taffy would soon know as Uncle Morley. April 8 to 14, 1952. At Easter, Tad and Ma'am gave presents, but only one, not like at Noel. They made baskets for Joe, Liz, and Freddie, and sent gifts to those they loved well. We know exactly what Tad gave to his Ma'am. It wasn't something made on a lathe. It was a copy of the Pilgrim hymnal inscribed, "To the lady who taught me to sing with joy and faith." April 1 to 7, 1952. There was, of course, a lot going on in national and international news. In Paris, all eyes were fixed on Ike. In Korea, deep concern for our Allied crews. In Wauseon, Tad received a letter from Defiance College's Board of Trustees saying, "We would appreciate having your photo, for we're ready to give the press a story on the honorary degrees." March 25 to 31, 1952. Ma'am was in her 14th week and prepared for Taffy's growth spurt. She already had 3 others, and she knew it wouldn't hurt. She started to watch her diet. Ma'am knew exactly what to do. She paid attention to all the signs, especially the one that said, "Eat for 2." March 18 to 24, 1952. It would be his half-birthday in much later years, but in March 52, Taffy was simply changing gears, shifting into his second trimester, an amphibian 3 inches long. He already had fingerprints, and he had 1.5 ounces of song. March 11 to 17, 1952. On March 13, Tad was editing what would be a perennial theme, family correspondence, and he had this great scheme to compile a book of letters from his Tad to his kin, and Socratically knowing himself, with himself he did begin. March 4 to 10, 1952. It really is a miracle, this growth and human development. Taffy's hands could open and close. His teeth were forming to a certain extent. Some things were called follicles, while others were named buds, and Ma'am and Tad always had chocolate among their favorite Holloway's 1928 Milk Duds. February 26 to March 3, 1952. Tad's church was congregational, but it still observed Lent, though with themes and variations, for Sundays deeming Wednesdays ill spent. So with Taffy 10 weeks old, Lenten Sundays looked like this. Morning sermons on peace, gospel, parables, and kingdom, with 8 p.m. discussions over coffee, as that was Tad's wish. February 19 to 25, 1952. Taffy was now officially a fetus. Fetus was the old spelling. And did Ma'am and Tad know? If they did, there was no telling. Taffy has the family papers, or if he doesn't, he knows where they are. But he's not sure when Ma'am announced, "My 4th pregnancy has now gone this far." February 12 to 18, 1952. Happy Valentine's Day. Taffy couldn't hear, for God who formed him in the womb had not yet knit the ear, but he had made his inmost parts intricately woven in Ma'am's nook, and all of Taffy's days which were formed for him had already been written in God's book. February 5 to 11, 1952. Taffy was still an embryo on a very important day, when the trustees of Defiance College met and had their say. They voted on 2 candidates, Reverend Earl Pleasant and Taffy's Reverend Tad, to receive honorary degrees in June, and boy did this make Ma'am and Tad glad. January 29 to February 4, 1952. Tad always called economics the dismal science. He was nonchalant about money, though he knew its Pauline reliance. The laborer is worthy of his wages, but pastors are not paid like scholars. Tad's total salary for 1952 was a whopping $3,200. January 22 to 28, 1952. Sunday, January 27, was the start of the new year, the year of the Chinese water dragon, a gentle beast who causes no fear. and Taffy was living in water, and he and Mam were right on scale. And 39 years later, Taffy would read Dr. Johnson's Strange That in Heaven Will Receive No Mail. January 15 to 21, 1952. On any given Sunday, Tad could be theatrical. It was a deep instinct, not like the system metrical. So on the third Sunday of January, with the 10 Commandments on dinner plates, Tad holds them up like Moses, then throws them down, and his congregation awakes. January 8 to 14, 1952. Being an embryo was not a race, for Taffy had already won out over all of Tad's other sperm, one when he reached Mam's ovum. But Taffy was now speeding along, multiplying like Operation Overlord, imitating the favorite son of Wasion, Barney Oldfield, the racer for Henry T. Ford. January 1 to 7, 1952. Taffy is now an embryo, happy in his endometrial home, securely attached to the uterus, a created thing, a poem. Taffy and Mam needed no pregnancy tests for their happiness to begin, for during these days Taffy was surrounded by human chorionic gonadotropin. December 30 to 31, 1951. Just before the new year, Taffy becomes a blastocyst. He's going to break out of his zone. His totipotent cells can't be missed. He's going to land on his first bed, and there he'll get a new name. But if, like many blastocysts, he hadn't stuck, he would not have gone on to fortune and fame. December 26 to 29, 1951. Taffy is a 16-cell conceptus, popularly called a little mulberry. That's morula in Latin. He's floating free and unwary of how he's dividing and growing, fed by Mam's uterine milk. He's waiting for the lining to thicken, to make his landing smooth as silk. December 25, 1951. What is Taffy today, this Tuesday child full of grace? He's a pre-implantation conceptus, preparing to take on another face. He's traveling toward the uterus. He's dividing but not growing. And if anyone could see him, they'd say, your zona pellucida is showing. December 24, 1951. Taffy is a zygote, a single diploid cell. And here's more about it if you don't know the term too well. He had 2 homologous copies of each chromosome, and though it was never talked about, he was a product of Mam and Tad's erogenous zone.